Hello, Thinkscript scholars. This is Clarence Carr. Today we're going to use Thinkscript to create a comparison chart. I want you to know you can always reach out to me on Twitter at Clarence Carr. You can also leave comments in the comment sections under this YouTube video. And I would appreciate it if you would give me a thumbs up if you find this video helpful. Also encourage you to join my channel so that you can be updated when additional videos are released. So today, before we get started on the comparison charts, we're going to do a little bit of review of the features of the Thinkscript editor. And there are just a few things that are helpful here that probably should be touched on at least. How you can adjust the font size and type, the autocomplete function that you can turn on and off, and then how to get help while you're working on your Thinkscripts. Also, we're going to talk briefly about how to export and import your own Thinkscript files. The servers at Thinkorswim will maintain your files generally, but I always feel somehow a little bit more comfortable when I have a copy of my files locally so that I can pull them up and reference them if somehow they aren't there one day. I want to also just discuss briefly where we're going to go with this today. We are going to create a comparison chart. We will show how to use a custom set of inputs for your input function rather than just the preset ones that are available through Thinkscript. We'll focus on particularly how to use the switch, the script, and the first functions. And finally, we're going to show one way to highlight a chosen symbol's price action on this graph. So moving forward, or I should say, I want to point out that I am a member at marketscholars.com. I'm a premium subscription member, and there are times when these videos will reference studies or discussions or conversations that we have had at Market Scholars, and I must respect the intellectual property rights of both David Settle and Brandon Van Zee, who have started this venture. And so these discussions that have anything to do with proprietary information regarding charts or scripts or strategies developed at Market Scholars will be available in video form to premium members at Market Scholars only when I do those videos. You can sign up at www.marketscholars.com, and I would point out that this is well worth the price of admission. David and Brandon both have extensive history of experience in the market and in both trading and investing techniques. They are excellent teachers. They have just some superb graphs and Thinkscripts that they use, and they make those available to their premium members. So a little shout out to David and Brandon at Market Scholars, and also we'll point out that they do have a Twitter presence as well at Market_Scholars here. So just a little reminder as to why some of these videos won't be available to the public when I am discussing things that are proprietary in nature to Market Scholars. So I'm going to jump into the Thinkscript charts here, and we're going to get started with the talking a little bit about the editor. So I have clicked here on this flask, and we will create a new study. And this is always the default that we've seen in the past come up. With this, I'm going to just point out that under this options button here, you have the autocomplete, and you can set font settings. You can create, choose a different font if you don't like the typeface of the font, and you can choose different sizes. I'm going to keep this at 24 because I think that shows up fairly well on the YouTube videos at that size, and hopefully you can see what I have on the screen. The other thing that I will point out is that this box doesn't come standard at this size, and they don't have a real easy way to resize it other than just grabbing the corner and resizing it. Typically, I think it's about like this when you first open it, and I like to have a little bit more real estate. They don't have the maximize or restore buttons up here, so you have to just kind of grab this down here, and I found it's if you can grab it by the corner, just kind of open it up like that so you have enough space on your screen to see in context what it is that you're working with. So we're going to first talk about, since we see that autocomplete is checked, let's use this and just see how this works. Let's say that we want to change that plot data equals close to plot data equals get last. And you can see that things are starting to pop up as I just type in the get L. Actually, I could have just done it with get, and there's even a longer list. But let's say we want to get last year. Okay, so I could just click on that, and it would autocomplete for me. I would just put the parentheses in, and then data would be assigned to whatever last year was. Now, let's say that up here, just above that, I want to put in a remark about what I'm about to do. I know this is very simplistic in regards, but I just want to show you one of the little annoying features that can occur with autocomplete as well. If you're typing in up here and you say in more common terminology that you just want to get last year, so you're going to type this out with a space, and of course, get last year. Now, it's interesting, this is not doing this to me this time. Oftentimes, when I just get to that part right here, it will fill in like this. I'm not sure why that didn't happen today, but it does occasionally happen that if, even when you're typing a remark, that it will fill in. Happily, that's not doing that right now. Maybe they fixed that, but as of yesterday, I know that it was still filling in. So hopefully that won't be an issue going forward, but if you notice that, you may have to decide whether you want to use autocomplete or not, because in the past it has been somewhat irritating when you're trying to type something in and it just decides what it wants to put in there for you, and it has nothing to do with what you actually wanted. All right. Let's talk a little bit about help features. You can click right on this button, and this will take you out to the web page that I've referenced in my prior videos that will have a complete description of all the reserved words in Thinkscript, all the other choices you have. Basically, this is a table of contents this brings you to, and you can expand each of these and see what your choices are under each one. You can also just search for something, such as, let's say we want to search for switch, and we can just click on switch and go there. Okay, let's go back over to our charts again. Another way you can access this help, and it's a little bit more context sensitive, is you basically have the same list of same table of contents over here on the side. You can click on, say, a function. Say we want to look at statistics and standard deviation, and down here you'll get a very brief description of what parameters you pass to standard deviation and what the defaults are. The length will by default be 12 in this study, and a very brief description of how that study works. And if you want more details, you can click on this and you'll be taken over basically to the same page we were looking at earlier, and it will give you a brief description, some general information about how it is developed, and if you have a strong math background, you'll probably recognize this terminology and these symbols here. And then typically they will give you a set of Thinkscript as an example. We can just take that right there and copy it, as a matter of fact, right into here. We're not going to change the name there because we're just having fun with this right now. and just see that this does in fact work. Let me do one thing so you can see that things change in the background. Well, let's see. That's probably good enough. You can see that the price graph is there. Now this is going to be quite different once we do this. So this added this on at the bottom, so it shows you basically what the standard deviation is at using the last 12 bars in this study. So you can just take their examples and plug them right in if you want to, and I'll show you one example where I've actually done that in our study for today. Okay, let's go back out here. We're going to actually, I'm going to remove this here, and then I really don't want it showing up over here. So I'll click here, and now I'm going to right-click on that, and we will delete that study that we just put in. Okay. Now, I want to discuss a little bit about saving studies. When you have a study like this, is the study we created in the line drawing example, where we went from the high close to the close. And right now, this study has been saved out on the Thinkscript servers. But let's say I want to save a copy of that locally. So I can highlight that, right-click on it, and click on Export. At that point, this brings me out here to my TOS scripts, and I can just save that right there. What we're going to do next is show how to import a file, and we're going to import the file that we're planning on using today. Now this is out on my server, and I have a list of files here that I have developed over time, and we'll get over here to the one I'm looking for. Right. Here we go. We're going to click on that, open, and now it brings it into this panel on the left-hand side of this window. And now I can either reference that right here, or I can bring it into my chart and use it in my chart. The other thing I want to point out is that there is a little question mark over here, and I want to point out that I can click on this, and I have developed some hints regarding this. This will tell you that you need to turn off the price graph in settings, show extended hours must be turned off. You can enter most symbols, Forex and futures don't work well, and you should change it. You may want to change the expansion area to 5 under settings time axis. So that's some hints in how to use this, and we'll talk about how those get put into the chart as well. Okay, let's go ahead and add that to our study. And let's take a look at diving into this a little bit more. First of all, I want to look at the commands that we said we were going to use today. We want to focus on first the switch command. So I'm out at the Thinkorswim Learning Center, and this is a discussion of the switch command. The switch statement is used to control the flow of program execution via a multi-way branch depending on the input value. So you're probably familiar with this if you have any significant connection with programming in the past, but basically what you're doing is setting up with the switch statement, you're saying, okay, in case this happens, do this. In case this happens, do this. And in case none of that happens, this is the default. So let's look at this little bit of code just for a minute. And I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bigger on my screen so that you can see it better. Okay. It says input price equals close, input plot type, and this is the typical input statement, and you can see that they have some custom inputs here. Now, normally when you have an input like this first statement, input price equals close, Thinkorswim will know when the user comes to that input that that the user will have choices of close, open, high, low, and there are the other fractional views of those various components like H plus L plus C plus O divided by 4, etc. But in some cases, you want to develop your own inputs that are more easily understood by the end user, and they're not pre-built into Thinkscript. So this is an example where they have decided that the default will be the simple moving average, but they may want a red exponential moving average, a green exponential moving average, or a weighted moving average. And so the user can, in their, if they go to the little gear that we'll look at here in a minute, they can go and choose one of these. And when they do, this program, when it executes, will come to this switch statement. It will look for the plot type that has been chosen by the user in this input statement. And then based on what that plot type is, it will branch off and either plot the average based on the average price or the weighted moving average price, or they can, if they didn't put anything in, it will default to the exponential average. And then they will also return some plot types down here. But the main thing I wanted to focus on here is just how this switch command works. Let's next go to the first command, which is another command we're going to want to look at today. The first command or function returns the value of the parameter expression in the very first bar. So basically, the very first bar on the left side of your chart, as soon as Thinkscript encounters that bar, it will return whatever value you put in here. And their example here, and this is very similar to what we'll be doing today, they have this declare lower and then define close 1 equal to the first close. In other words, the close of the first bar, whatever that is, will now be held in this variable close 1. Then they're plotting the data, and what they're doing here is basically a comparison chart where whatever the underlying is, it will be compared to itself at the close of that first bar. So the math for that is basically to take the current close and subtract out the close from the first bar, and then once you've calculated that difference, you divide by the close of the first bar and multiply by 100. So you would have basically a percentage that would develop. So we're going to actually copy this, and I think I'm going to have to go back over here when we'll take off this study because we're not going to use that quite yet. I want to just show you how this works. We'll take this right here and add that in. We'll just leave that study names fine for now because this is just for an example to show you. So you can see that this is showing up on the lower part, and it gives us a percentage of what has happened to the SPY since back in, looks like the first day is August 2nd of last year. Now, sometimes when you get into intraday charts, there can be a problem with this. I don't know if there will be a problem on this or not. We'll just see if this is a problem. No, on SPY, I think you get pretty good data all the way through. There are times with other symbols that can be a problem, although it doesn't look like I'm able to find one right this minute. The other issue is that in our chart, when we look at a comparison chart, we're not going to want to see the price action. We just want to look at the various symbols compared to themselves. Now, of course, here we're just seeing the one symbol. And we are going to create an entire set of symbols that will compare themselves to each other. So let's go back here now, and we'll delete this out. I'm going to bring up our comparison chart, and we're going to step into this in just a minute. Let's apply it first and just see what the result is. So here's an example. You can see that some of these don't come up well on the intraday chart. There's some gaps, and also this is all squished down at the bottom. Now, if you looked at my prior video on gaining consistency across your Thinkorswim charts, you'll be able to go up here and just make some changes as regards to showing the price subgraph, and you'll want to unclick the extended hours. Remember, we read that in the help or the hints section of this study just a few minutes ago. And then the chart looks better on your screen. Now, if you don't have these presets done here, let me go back and re-click those. If you don't have those presets there, then you can go into this sprocket right here, and on the General tab under Chart Settings, go down and unclick the Show Price Graph, Price Subgraph. Also, if you will highlight that like mine is, it will then show up in your Style drop-down menu. The next thing to take care of is to go over to Equities, make sure that this Show Extended Hours Trading Session is turned off if you're doing it this way. And finally, if you recall, we did have a discussion about showing up some additional bars over here to the side so that these don't get so jammed in on top of themselves. So we're going to go ahead and do that. But I didn't get the price graph, did I? So I'm just going to take care of that right here. Okay. Now, if we go into this, and let's see what the user would see if they click on this sprocket. So first of all, show that I have to put the name in here. I like to show the name so that it shows up over here. I know what chart I'm looking at, the sector comparison chart. I want to show the name, yes. Sometimes I may not want to, and I could just click on that and make that say no. And you can see that when I apply that, the name goes away. I'm going to change that back to yes. And then we have the option on this chart of either starting at the close of the first bar on the chart, or we can go back and close one bar earlier. That's the nice part about this first command. The first command doesn't always have to just include whatever the value is on that bar. You can just say that when I'm at the first bar, I want to look at a value, and that value can be indexed to a day earlier, 5 days earlier, or 10 days later. Doesn't really matter. It's just that is the reference point that you always are starting with will be the first bar when you use that first command that we talked about. And we'll discuss some more. There's a way for the users to set the global line weight and to decide how many decimals they want to show over here with the percentages on the right side of the chart. So let's see how this is all built up. You know, there's one other thing that I did not talk about and I meant to, and that is the script command. I'm going to go back out just a minute and we're going to discuss the script command. Basically, when you use the script command, and this is a reserved word, you're running a Thinkscript within your Thinkscript. And I think this example shows this pretty well. Basically, they have a script set up here called myEMA. This is how that is calculated. It has inputs itself for that script, and you can then call this script from this line here. Plot OSC equals myEMA. MyEMA references this script here. You pass parameters to it, close, comma, 25. And you'll notice that 25 is different than the default length up here. And then you subtract the same calculation on a 50 period exponential moving average. So basically this oscillator looks at the difference between the 25 and the 50 period moving average, and it runs it through this script each time. So back over to what we're doing. Let's take a look at our script. So I always like to start my headers, as I've told you in the past, with a name up here so that I can remember what this is. I actually changed the name here for our studies from what I had initially named this. And then in this case, I think it's helpful to have some notes to the user. Turn off the show price graph, show extended hours must be turned off. This doesn't work as well in Forex and futures, but you can enter most other symbols. You may want to show 5 to 10 bars on the right. Remember that that was the same information that we showed in the hints section back here when we brought this up and clicked on the question mark right here. However, it presents differently here than when I just had the text. And to set this up in the hints, you do this. You have a hint section that is presented like this, and it has some formatting options. And I think, honestly, if you do HTML well, you could probably make this a lot fancier than what I've done here. But these are some of the things that can be done. And if you want to reference how to do those hints better, then once again, I would reference that you come back here, and it talks about customizing hints. Under Appendix C, customizing study hints, and it gives you the description of how to do that and how to set up so that you can have a little information that shows up under that question mark in the left-hand column right here. That question mark right there. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the fact that you can put hints in. Now in this study we're going to declare lower, and these are our inputs. Again, I have the name sector comparison. I want to show that name. These are things we already looked at over what the end user can see when they click on that other sprocket. Here's where I'm defining my custom inputs, and I will use these as we go through. In our switch statement, I will also at one point have to assign numeric values to these so that I can use them in some of the logic that occurs. Although we can use these directly in switch statements, we cannot use them directly in if-then statements because this would be recognized as text in an if-then statement, and it wouldn't work out well for us. We want to show the label that informs us as to where we're starting. That's this label right up here you can see at the top that is showing in the background. Begins at prior bar close. We want to show that. Our default global line weight will be 2, and the number of decimals we will show by default will be 2. We show the name label here in SPY. Well, actually, you know what? We turned off the name label. Let's go back and let's turn that back on. Okay, we'll apply and come back. So we have the, we're showing our start label and we're showing our name label here. Okay, now here's where we set the global line weight, define LW for line weight, and essentially what this is doing is some error checking. For instance, the end user may put 10 in. Well, I really don't have an option for 10. The line weights can go from 1 to 5. And I'm going to use 5. I'm going to reserve the number 5 for our highlighting that we're going to do. So I'm really only giving the user these 4 choices of 1, 2, 3, or 4. And if they don't enter one of those, or if they enter 20, then it will default to 2. So now we're going to get into our scripts. Remember, we have let the user decide whether they want to start with the close of the first bar on the chart, or if they want to start with the close of the prior bar on the chart, the one that's just off to the left. Now you can see that currently we're using the prior bar close, and you'll also note that these on the side of your chart over here in the background, that these don't all start at the same place. That's because they all point to the same place on the prior bar, but we're not able to actually see that bar. So when we come to our scripts, we have a script that is used when the user has chosen first bar data. And that script has various symbols that can get passed to it. And it looks at those symbols and does the following. So first of all, it defines the first close of the symbol that is passed, okay? And it takes that value, that first close, and it subtracts it from the current close of the symbol that is passed into this script. It then, after it finds that difference, it divides it by the close of the very first close. That is, in this case, the close of the first bar, and then multiplies it by 100. If the user has chosen to use the prior bar data, then everything is the same, except note that the close 1 is defined as the first close symbol offset to the left by an index of 1. So basically, you're looking at the close 1 bar to the left of what you can see on the chart. Again, the difference in percentage is calculated the same way once you've decided where you're going to start. So now it's time for us to run each symbol through these scripts according to the script that has been chosen by the user. This is where we'll start to use the switch command. So we're going to plot SPY, and we will decide which plot we're going to make of the SPY, determined by what we are starting with per the choice of the user. So we can either start with the first bar close or the prior bar close. And if the user chose the first bar close, then we'll say SPY equals 2. And for now, we're going to not worry about the rounding data. Basically, we're passing SPY as the symbol into the script above that's called first bar data. Remember, that's this script right here. So we pass SPY into that. This plots data out and sends that back to this part of the statement. Then we take the returned information, we round it, and we add the number of decimals on the end that the user has chosen. If, in fact, the user chose to use the prior bar close, then the alternate script is run above with the same processing, essentially, except it starts, as we noted earlier, 1 bar prior to the beginning of the chart. Then we want to format this plot a little bit. So I like to hide the title most of the time, unless it's a value that I really need to know. That would bring up, if you don't hide the title, there will be additional information that shows up here. That is not really something I want to have on all of these. You'd have a list of numbers all the way across, and essentially it would be the same information as you can already see right here in these bubbles. So I'm hiding the title here. I'm setting the line weight to the line weight, the global line weight that was chosen by the user or assigned by the assignment statement up above. I assign a value color, and I determine a style as well. Now, you may have already noticed that the charting for SPY appears somewhat different than the other lines on this chart. SPY is this little roadmap looking line here, and that is because I've highlighted it and set it up a little bit differently. And how we've done that is this. Let me bring this on down so you can see that the information itself is first plotted in a black line with a medium dash. Then I copy that plot essentially by saying plot highlight equals to whatever the SPY was. I set that line weight to 5, which is wider than the line weight that is assigned globally. Remember, I said I reserved the number 5 for use in highlighting. And then I set that number to white and set that curve style to firm. That is how we get this sort of a graph or line image on the SPY to make it sort of stand out from everything else. That was the purpose of trying to do that in that manner. Now, I understand this may be busier than you like, and it's not something that you necessarily have to do, but it's just an idea that you can think about to help certain things stand out a little bit more. And I think it's at least good to sort of creatively think about these things a bit. Now, we repeat that same information for each of these, except we don't have the highlight on each of these. Notice that as we get into the next one, say XLB, when we add a chart bubble at the end as well. And we have already chosen different colors. We add a label for that particular underlying. We also decide where to put the chart bubble. So this basically, this statement is saying, if you're on the last bar, basically this is saying if the next bar is not a value, then what I want you to do is go to the last value of XLB, or take the value of XLB at that bar, and I want you to put in the bubble the symbol or the letters XLB. We're going to color that yellow, which will correspond to the label that we have here. And if XLB is greater than SPY, I want you to print that out above the actual value. Otherwise, I want you to print it below the actual value. The idea of that is to try to spread out your bubbles a little bit more. And you can see that this bubble does point up right there slightly, as does this one to the value. Although it's maybe difficult to see that, the little pointer on the bubble points up here, and on these above the SPY, they point down. You can see the XLU one probably a little bit more clearly. But as I said, that's just an attempt to try to keep all your bubbles sort of spread out a little bit better, assuming that half of the symbols will be above the SPY and half will be below in general when you're looking at sectors. Now we're going to come down to the bottom. We're basically repeating all of this same information for each symbol, always calling that first bar closed script or the prior bar closed script, and assigning colors to the line, the label, and the bubble. At the very bottom, however, we want to highlight the entered symbol. Now you'll notice that I've already handled SPY and all of the sectors that we wanted to cover, all the symbols for the underlying sectors that we wanted to cover. However, in this particular script, a user might enter something up here that was not one of those symbols. They could enter, for instance, CLT or GLD. And so we have to come up with a way to handle that. Now, since we don't know what that value is, I am dealing with this separate from the scripts that we wrote above. Above, we in our scripts, remember, we had, let me go back up here. I'll try not to make you dizzy again. I know flipping through this stuff makes it kind of hard to follow. Remember, in our scripts, we had the various symbols that we knew were going to be passed to it, and then we ran the data on those symbols. Down here at the bottom, yeah, there we are. We don't necessarily know that the symbol that the user enters will be one of those symbols. So in this case, we have to use a little bit different logic, and I use the switch statement here for me to be able to convert these choices into numbers. So this basically defines the start choice, and it switches based on what the user chose to start with, whether it's the first bar close or the prior bar close. If the user chose the first bar close, then start choice will be assigned 1. Otherwise, start choice will be assigned to 2. And as you can see, start choice is highlighted here when I hover over it to show that this is where I'm going to use those numbers in making my decisions for what the user has entered. So this statement says define symbol close equals to if start choice equals 1, then first close, else first close 1 bar ago. So this is, of course, saying that the close 1 bar prior to the first bar is the close that we want to return. Then again, we calculate our percentages just as we have before in this part of the statement here, and round that to the decimals that the user has requested. We then plot that data out, and we will set this line weight to 5 and color it white. Now, when we're going to place the bubble, we need to know, I don't know if I can show this all on one. Let me see if I can bring my screen down a little bit more and show this all on one. There we go. We need to know if this is a symbol that we've already dealt with as one of our sectors or the SPY, or if it's something like I said, TLT or GLD that's not in our list. So we know what we're showing, so we say that it is shown, define is shown equals one of these, okay? If the symbol data equals one of these, then it's shown, else no. Then we can use that to determine if we want to display an additional bubble or not, because if it's already shown, you don't want to have a second bubble popping up there, at least in this script, although you could certainly, that's a decision you could make for yourself. But I have chosen not to have it show up there. So add chart bubble, and this bubble will be placed at a bar that is the last bar, and it will only be placed at that bar if it's not shown. So is shown is the result of this statement here, and the exclamation point means not. The level where that bar will be placed is sim data, which is taken from this plot here. And we will get the symbol to decide what to display in this bubble. We will color it white. And again, we will do the same placement of the bubble above or below the data based on whether the value is above or below SPY. Then we add the start choice label, which is this label here begins at the prior bar, or it doesn't begin at, or begins at the first bar. And we make that, again, dependent on our start choice that we set in this bit of script right here, the switch and case statement. And that's the study. Let's go look at it here. And what I want to point out is that right now we have XLE entered in this bar, and you might notice that XLE has a white line that makes it stand out somewhat from the others, which is kind of a nice feature, I think, a little bit of this chart. For instance, if we put in XLY, now XLY will be the highlighted symbol. It's loading up. My internet speed here is pretty slow. I'm a bit out in a moderately rural area, and we don't have great internet speed, so it's a little slow. But you can see that XLY loaded up with the highlight here. So if you're having a hard time following one of the lines through this conglomerate of lines on this display, that is how you can do it. Now let's go change. We have right now begin at prior bar close, and you can see that things don't all start together because they start together one bar off to the left. But if we change that to first bar close, then you can see they all do in fact start together right there. Now some of this has some disconjugate data that's available, and of course we can only display what is available, so that you'll get some breaks in the line sometimes as we see in some of these areas. The other issue is that I want to point out that you can actually put in any other symbol such as GLD, and it will again calculate where GLD falls in the midst of all these other sectors. So that's kind of nice that you can compare other things besides just the sectors on this chart and see where it falls. Well, that's our tutorial for today. I hope you found it helpful, and happy scripting. Thank you very much.